old-fashioned beef stock and mushroom gravy. And also crème fraiche and mashed potatoes. To me, this is total comfort food and perfect for those chilly days and nights of autumn. This video is a bit of a compilation of a few different things. The timestamps down below will make it easy for you to jump to whatever you want to see. I put this together for my friend Aubrey, who wanted to know just how I made all this stuff and who's been so kindly patient waiting for me to do it. So here are the bones. Oxtails are always my starting place. Oxtails, I think, are perfect for beef stock. Make sure you actually get some of those little ones because they'll have lots of connective tissue to create gelatin with. Here's a big marrow bone I got also. Sometimes you'll see the marrow bones chopped up into smaller pieces or split or whatever, it doesn't matter, but there's a big marrow bone that I like to use. Here's some neck bones. You can use any kind of stew bones or soup bones that you want. These had a nice bit of meat on them, so I was happy to get those. I'm also using shanks because of all of the marrow in the center and also all of the connective tissue throughout the meat. Usually this meat is so tough, and that's why it's perfect for long cooking. Because when those connective tissues break down, it creates a lot of gelatin. An amazing sale on back ribs. I couldn't pass those up. So I got a few of those as a bonus to add. For the vegetables, you just need 4 to 5 stalks of celery and 4 to 5 carrots and 2 to 3 onions, just chopped up into quite big chunks. For the onions, I like to leave the skins on. It helps actually with the color of the stock itself. Put all the vegetables into a fairly large roasting pan and just kind of spread them out on the bottom. Here I'm adding about 4 to 5 bay leaves around, and then I like to use 2 tablespoons of tomato paste. This helps with put a little bit of acid into the stock, and with immaculately clean hands, I just squish the tomato paste all around onto the vegetables and coat all the vegetables in that tomato paste, and then I'll spread them back out and add a single layer of meat. There are all the bones in there, and I'm going to plop that into a very hot oven, about a 400-degree oven, and I'm going to cook those until they get really toasty and roasty brown, about 45 minutes. Until they look like that, nicely browned and smelling delicious. You can see how the meat has kind of toughened up, which is great, and gotten so brown. At the bottom, you'll see some of the fat and juices have already started to release, and we're going to use all of that into the stock. So take all those bones and I'm going to plop them into the largest stock pot I have and just kind of layer them in. I always put the bones at the bottom. I'm not totally sure why, but I put the bones on the bottom and then layer the rest of the vegetables on top. And then with this pan, with the roasting pan, I'm going to add some water and start deglazing all of that lovely goodness down there. I'm going to deglaze that. There's some water. It actually is easier when you're deglazing the pan if you put it back on the stove and just kind of cook it a little bit as you're deglazing it. Then you can get all of the bits. Once it's all deglazed, I'm just going to pour it into a bowl so you can see what it's looking like. Ooh, that's tasty. So just take that bowl of goodness and dump it into the stock pot with the bones and the vegetables. And then I'm going to fill it up with water until it just gets to the very top of the vegetables, just until everything's basically covered. And then I'll put a lid on it and put it back onto the stove and bring it to the bubble. and then lower the heat to the very lowest possible setting, put the lid on, and let it simmer overnight or for about 18 to 24 hours. The next morning, this is what it looks like. Here's the big marrow bone. You can see it's still quite solid on one side, but on the other side is where all the marrow has been cooked, and we're gonna use that. Here's the meat that you can just start to shred. If you do this for chicken or turkey or other kind of things, the meat itself loses a lot of its flavor. But when you do it with these really great and tough meat bones, so much of the flavor is retained. Here's the stock. You can't totally see, but this is almost a gallon of stock, 3.5 quarts of delicious stock, and I'm going to just strain it here. Put a colander on a big bowl, and then take a wet piece of cheesecloth and just lay it over the colander, and then pour the stock through the cheesecloth. This method of making stock is great for any kind of stock you want to make, like chicken, turkey, lamb, pork. You don't have to cook the poultry bones as long as like more of the meaty bones, but the basic method is the same, and it'll work out perfectly. Don't worry too much about this orange color. This comes from the carrots and the tomato paste. That color's pretty much all in the fat, which we're going to remove. Once everything's been strained, then you can see I have a quart container here, and I'm just going to pour that in there, and the fat's going to rise to the top. I'm just going to ladle it into the quart container and set it aside and let all the fat rise to the top. I fill it to about an inch and a half to the top. You can see all the wonderful fat now that's risen, and I'm going to take that off and just put it in the fridge and use that in a couple of days when I make the mushroom gravy. Use that fat for the gravy. That's ideal and perfect. You'll see here, I'm just ladling it off. I've seen those little like gravy fat remover things. I don't have one of those, so I just use a bowl and a ladle. And then I'm going to just top up the rest of the container with some remaining stock. If you freeze this, you want to leave at least like an inch in the top, because it expands as it freezes and then it'll pop out. Now, this might turn some people off because it looks a little bit gross, but that marrow is so amazingly delicious, and you can mix it in with all of the meat, the shredded meat. This, I'm just taking the membrane off the back ribs and then continuing to shred that meat. You can use this meat for pot pies or for tacos or for really anything. It's great. Okay, here is a very easy and delicious way to make crème fraiche. You just need heavy cream and buttermilk. The buttermilk doesn't matter if it's light or regular buttermilk. I've tried both, and this works just perfectly with both. I have a little pint container here, a pint jar, and I'm going to fill it up to about 3/4 of the way, 2/3 of the way up with the cream, and then I'm going to add buttermilk and just pour that until it's about a 1/2 inch to the top. And then you want to stir it up so that the buttermilk and the cream are really, really well smooshed up with each other and really distributed well. And then I'm just going to cover it with a little piece of cheesecloth and put a rubber band around it and set it out on the counter overnight. It's that easy. That's all there is to it. For me, it usually takes about 16 hours. And so the next day, I just take the cheesecloth off, and you can see the beautiful creaminess of this crème fraiche. It's like sour cream, except a million times better in every way. So I always have some crème fraiche in the fridge. So just put a lid on it, put it in the fridge, it'll firm up even a little bit more, and it's amazing. Years ago, my friend Ellen and I used to go to this little old-fashioned Ukrainian restaurant in the East Village in New York City. We never had a lot of money, so we'd order a small cup of cold borscht and a little side of mashed potatoes with mushroom gravy. It was heaven, and we'd walk out of there just $5 lighter in our pockets. I developed this version of mushroom gravy based on those wonderful memories from all those years ago. I have 4 little packages of mushrooms. This is what they had at the store. It doesn't matter what mushrooms you get. A combination of mushrooms, whatever mushrooms you want. If you use whole mushrooms, what I do is after I just clean them, I just take off a little bit of the stem and then just kind of chunk them up, just slice them. It doesn't matter the size or the type of mushrooms. As I said, I just chop them up, and you don't have to make them even or uniform or whatever. I just kind of chop them into smaller bits. Or if you have a lot of mushrooms, which you should, alternatively, you could just throw them into a food processor. And it takes a couple of batches. And what I usually do is just pulse them quick 2 or 3 times. And then I'm going to just check to see how it's looking after a couple of pulses. And it needs a little bit more, so I will pulse it again 2 or 3 times until they're well, but not finely chopped. And that's it. You get a big bowl of mushrooms. And I just kind of broke up that bigger one there. But that's what you want. Big bowl of mushrooms. Into a pot, you want to add about 3 tablespoons, 3 to 4 tablespoons of butter, and 2 big heaping tablespoons of that fat that we skimmed off from making the stock. This makes a big difference in the flavor. So there's a hot pot that I'm just putting in front of the camera so you can see it, and I'm adding the fat from the beef, and then I'm going to add the butter in there and just let it kind of melt up and get ready. I'll actually put it on the stove, stir that around, and then add all of the mushrooms with about a tablespoon of salt. And at this point, you're gonna probably be thinking, "Oh, I have too many mushrooms in there. That's a lot of mushrooms." Well, it is a lot of mushrooms, but you don't have too much. As you stir, almost immediately, you're going to start to see the mushrooms release their liquids, and these mushrooms are going to reduce down a lot. You can see this is still in just the initial stirring. Then I'm going to cover it with a lid just for a couple of minutes, like 5 minutes or whatever, until they really start to release their juices. All of these liquids from the mushrooms it's almost like they get absorbed back into the mushrooms, and the flavor becomes so concentrated and amazing. I just add a couple of splooshes of Worcestershire sauce. Not too much. You don't want too much of that. And then I'm just going to continue to cook down these mushrooms. It takes about 15 to 20 minutes, maybe even 25 minutes. I guess you just got to be patient. Just cook them down, reduce the liquid, and that's what you get. The mushrooms start to brown up, and look at how much they've reduced. All that flavor has been concentrated. It's amazing. Then I'm going to add about 4 to 5 cloves of minced garlic, more or less depending on your taste, but I'm going to add the garlic in here and just mix it around so that it's distributed well. And then I'm going to make a little hole in the center and add about another tablespoon of the fat and another tablespoon of the butter, and then 2 to 3 really, but 2 big heaping tablespoons of flour to make a roux with. Just kind of stir it around. And then, because I want it to be as awkward as possible, I used a whisk here Whisk is like a little vacuum here. It just sucks up all those little mushroom pieces. Anyway, distribute the flour through all the mushrooms until you don't see any of the white flour anymore. I'm using all-purpose flour for this. Then, get rid of Then switch to a sensible spatula and stir that around nicely well. And then you're going to start to add the stock that we made. This is the beefy beef stock that I made a few days ago. And since it's cold stock, if you put cold stock into a roux and stir it around, you're not going to get lumps. I think that's a magical thing. So here I stirred about half of the quart of stock in. And then I'll add another few globs of the stock and stir that in, and then add the rest of the quart. So I guess this recipe makes about a quart of gravy. We bring that up to a simmer until it starts to thicken, and then you're going to cook this, I would say, for about 20 minutes. And I stir it like every 5 minutes or so, just to make sure that nothing's sticking to the bottom. And just keep cooking that, and you're going to see this most amazing, rich, delicious, finished gravy. There it is. Perfectly thick, not too thin, and the mushrooms are just amazing. It's one of my favorite gravies. You'll see here. I just put it in a little serving bowl, just to make it look a little nicer. You can see that thick, rich mushroom gravy. Okay, now this might just be a little too simplistic for some people, but I just thought I'd throw in here how to make some really light and fluffy mashed potatoes. I use brown potatoes or russet potatoes for mashed potatoes because I found that they tend to be a little fluffier. So I'm using three big russet potatoes and just peeling them and slicing them. I like gold potatoes for so many things, but for mashed potatoes, I like the brown russet potatoes. You peel them and chop them into, fairly equal sizes. And then my rule of thumb is for every potato, I like to use one big piece of garlic. And so, since some of the garlic was small, I'm using a little bit more. So you put that all in. I add about a tablespoon of salt and some cold water, and I cover it and put it on the stove, and I cook that until they are very soft and very delicious. About 25 to 30 minutes. Here they are all cooked up. You can see the softness. The fork just slides right in, but they're not just broken down or anything. I'm going to strain these potatoes, and in that hot bowl, I'm going to add a couple of tablespoons of butter and let that get melty, and then add the potatoes back in. And I'm using a potato masher. You can do whatever you want. I just think a potato masher is easiest for me. I'm going to get it started by mashing up the potatoes for just a couple of minutes. Ooh, that's a lot of steam. Just kind of mash the potatoes up, and here's the crème fraiche that we just made. And I'm going to add about 2 to 3 tablespoons of crème fraiche into the potatoes, and then start whipping these potatoes with a whisk. It doesn't take a long time, but it takes some elbow grease, takes some effort to whisk these in, but you're going to see they become so light and so smooth and so fluffy. So there's the mashed potatoes, and here to serve, I just put some potatoes there, and now I'm going to ladle some of that mushroom gravy over. Oh, perfect comfort food. You can take some of that shredded beef from the stock and just heat it up, serve it on the side. It goes perfectly well with these potatoes and the mushroom gravy. And it just adds even a little bit more richness. This dish is probably one of my most favorite things in the world in terms of comfort food and cold weather food. It takes a while, but it's so easy to make, really. It's so light and fluffy and delicious. So there it is, old-fashioned beef stock and mushroom gravy. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you have any questions, just let me know down below, and I'll try to answer them. But thank you very much for watching the video. Hope you liked it.